If there's one message I want to give you today is that we are strong promoters of free trade, especially with the United States. And I must say that several self-inflicted wounds have been caused recently. The renegotiation of NAFTA has been a one long trip to the dentist.
That's Quebec Premier François Legault in Washington today, promoting free trade between his province and the U.S. Getting the new NAFTA pass, as he referenced, has already been a very long process. And while Canada may be on board today, the U.S. president refused to meet with his congressional counterparts over other issues. But could that impact how NAFTA progresses? Simon Lester is Associate Director for the Center for Trade Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. He joins us now from Washington. Hi, Mr. Lester. Great to see you again.
Glad to be here.
Let me start off by asking you about what we heard from the president earlier today, essentially that he would be unwilling to work with the Democrats at this point on policy because of the investigations, unless they were to drop their call for investigations into his actions. Do you think that would have any kind of potential impact on talks where NAFTA is concerned?
It definitely could, but I would keep in mind that what we saw today seemed to me more like high-level bluster and negotiating tactics. And I think that behind the scenes, there are members of Congress and their staff talking to people at the U.S. Trade Representative's office about the substantive differences that Democrats in Congress have with the Trump administration on NAFTA/USMCA. And I would focus more, not that there have been leaks so we know what's going on, but I would focus more on those talks. You know, what Trump said to Pelosi, I mean, that's great. It's a great soap opera we have going on now, but I think that the behind-the-scenes work is probably more important for NAFTA's future.
Can you update us, our viewers, on where those talks stand right now? What's your understanding of what the discussions are like between the USTR and Democrats?
The only thing that I've read are reports that specific members of Congress have been sort of designated as you know, the ones responsible for talking to the White House, U.S. Trade Representative, about specific issues. But I have not seen any sort of details about the progress, how far they've gotten on specific issues like labor or enforcement. Just that there's been, you know, reports that the talks have started and are underway. But I don't have a sense of how far they've gotten or how long it will take.
Can we get into some of the issues right now that Democrats have expressed concern around? We had a guest on yesterday, Lori Wallach, who's director of the Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. She identified a few of them, primarily one around pharmacare. We know already, of course, we've heard Nancy Pelosi talk about environmental standards and labor protections. Let's start with labor. What is the main issue for the Democrats there?
The issue for the Democrats is trade with Mexico, a developing country with lower wages, weaker labor standards, makes them nervous. They worry about lost jobs. They feel like they were told in the original NAFTA that there would be enforceable labor provisions, but it didn't work out. So they want to be sure that what's in the USMCA will actually accomplish what they say they want to accomplish, which is improving Mexico's labor situation. And as I'm sure you know, there's been progress in Mexican Congress in sort of adopting labor reforms, but they say that's not enough. We need to verify that this will actually be implemented properly. So they're just looking for more assurance that the USMCA does in fact lead to higher labor standards in Mexico.
And what about drug patents?
Drug patents is an issue that is sort of relevant for U.S. policy, also for Canadian policy. But you can imagine that what the House Democrats' concern is really about our own flexibility here to loosen our restrictions on these particular pharmaceutical patents in question. If we commit in an international trade agreement to have a term of a certain length, well, then we can't reduce it if we would like to later. So it's much about U.S. domestic policy, I think, as it is about what happens in Canada or Mexico for the House Democrats.
And are there other issues that you think that are of major concern to Democrats that you've heard about lately?
So I think enforcement is a big one, and the House Ways and Means Committee had a whole hearing on this morning. When Democrats talk about enforcement, I'm not exactly sure what they mean sometimes. One key issue with the NAFTA had been the ability of governments to block the establishment of a panel to hear a dispute. It doesn't look to me like the USMCA fixed that problem completely. There were some changes made, but I'm not sure it fixes it. And so Democrats are sort of worried about that. Has that problem been fixed? But to some extent, they're also thinking more broadly about enforcement in a vague way that I can't figure out. So they have concerns about enforcement. I think they're trying to sort out what those concerns are and how they can be fixed, and whether there's anything that can be done with the USMCA text at this point to assuage their concerns.
That leads me perfectly to my next question, and that is, what is the potential fix here? Does this require a reopening of the agreement? Is there the possibility that a side deal could be reached? What do you envision as the way this plays out?
Ideally, if you're looking for the perfectly drafted agreement, you would want to reopen it. And I do think it's possible to reopen things narrowly, just designate 1 or 2 or 3 issues that are going to be looked at. People express concerns that if you reopen one, then the whole thing gets thrown into question, so it won't work. I don't know. I think it can be done, but to alleviate the concerns over that about sort of undermining everything that's already been agreed, you could you could have some sort of side agreement, side deal to fix some of the problems in the existing text. So, for example, there was a problem with establishing a roster of panelists. If the text doesn't properly provide for that, what you could have is the government sit down right now and say, well, we're just going to create the roster. So look, we've solved the problem in the text by putting the roster out there. So I think there are things you could do, either reopening the text or as side deals, that would probably fix most of the problems.
And the other question we have obviously here is, with the lifting of steel and aluminum tariffs, the conversation, at least on this side of the border, has turned to ratification. Yesterday, our guest made the assertion that if Canada were to ratify this deal soon, it might have a negative impact on the ratification process in the U.S. because of those concerns, because of the desire to reopen segments of the agreement. What do you think?
My personal view, and this is very speculative, is that what Canada does will not have a big impact on what happens here in the United States. Whatever Canada does will be used by one side or the other as an argument for taking some particular action, but it's either going to pass or not pass in the United States on its own merits, or on the merits of politics. So for Canada, I mean, I don't think, I wouldn't worry too much about what we do is going to, affect one way or the other what happens in the United States. It's too unpredictable. Do what you think is best. What happens here is based on our own messy politics.
And just quickly before I let you go, do you think the deal will be ratified in the U.S.?
I think there is a 20 to 30% chance of ratification. I think there's a lot of issues to be worked out. The high-level drama you saw earlier today does matter. If the Democratic congressional leadership and the Trump administration can't get along at all on anything, then that is going to negatively affect the chances of getting this thing passed.
All right, those aren't great odds. Thank you, Mr. Lester. We'll be sure to talk to you again. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
That's Simon Lester, Associate Director for the Center for Trade Policy Studies at the Cato Institute from Washington.